Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 6th of March, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar index. The dollar actually bottomed at the end of January, and we saw this recovery in price, and that was really continued into this week, became the sort of safe haven with what's been going on in the Middle East. But we are seeing that topping away now. And I guess the key point is we are seeing that dollar strength being short-lived. We've got a downside target there on sterling. If we look at the 60-minute chart, the daily chart, we see that price falling away because of the fears of what's going on in energy markets. Now, I do analyze the energy markets every morning for clients in our institutional space who trade energy, and we put out a morning call report every morning. And so I'm analyzing energy very, very closely. And basically today's call is that crude oil is still looking stronger, could go higher, but gas prices look like they may well have topped. Now, it's very changeable picture, obviously. Anything can happen with what's going on in the Middle East. But those inflationary fears of higher oil prices, which will feed through to the petrol pump, and higher gas prices, which will be less of a factor because we're coming into spring and summer. But the reality is the markets are worried about the fact that we're now seeing inflationary pressures, which means that interest rates are probably not going to be cut. And if we look at the bond markets, the interesting thing about the bond markets is this is where we're just starting to see the long-term trends. This is Japanese bond market, and Japan is the most indebted bond market in the world. Here, running at something like 250% of GDP, their national debt, and basically this was a real worry some weeks ago. And if we look at just some of the US bond markets, we're seeing here a real bounce away there on the 10-year, on the 30-year, again bouncing off the bottom. That's a higher low. So we are just seeing bond markets trending higher. And if we look at some of the other bond markets in Europe, this is the UK bond market. This is really worrying. Having heard, that UK borrowing has fallen to multi-month lows, and the borrowing costs going down. We've had a sharp increase this week in UK bond, in UK gilts. This is the 10-year gilt, and we've got an upside target, some 5.23%. We're sitting at 4.5. That's a big increase in the interest that the government will have to pay. And this is the big worry, really, is what's going on in the bond markets. We look at Germany. Similarly, we've got unactivated upside targets here. And that yesterday we saw another one not yet activated, but generated. And so we are seeing long-term bond yields. And Italy, again, a very heavily indebted nation, a new upside target. So the bond markets are a bit of a concern. Now, looking at the futures, equity markets have really held up remarkably well. I mean, it's quite unbelievable with everything that's going on, but it is rolling over, and we have failed to make a new high. The Nasdaq has had this downside target unactivated. That would turn red if we move to a new low. Has had that downside target unactivated. That's the selling thrust that generated that target. The key thing here is we are gradually moving below the cloud, and we can see here on the shorter term chart, it has been a one of seesaws, downside targets given, and then now potentially an upside target activated. And that's why the shorter term charts will often give you a heads up as what's going on. Looking at the DAX in Germany, again, it's held up pretty well. We have fallen back, testing the cloud on the daily, and the UK market, looking at the FTSE future, we're seeing here, again, we've got that fall away there. Looking at the 60-minute chart, there was a downside target that was given on Monday, and that's pretty much been met this week. So you really can't ignore, when you see these targets. So really quite interesting. If we go to just look at some of the other commodities, sugar is one I've been looking at for a client who I've been doing some work with. This has been quite incredible, meeting the downside targets there. And gold, It's looking again at the short-term downside targets given this week and met. So we're short-term bearish below the cloud. Silver has really seen a whole mixture of targets, but again below the cloud. And you would pay more attention to the targets that are occurring below the cloud. Now, looking at the Dow Jones Index, it was a pretty bearish day on the Dow yesterday. We see stocks like Salesforce now. It's a lot of these tech stocks starting to come off the bottom. So we're seeing Salesforce here. It's had a terrible run. That's the short-term chart. If we look at the daily chart, you can see that it really has halved in value, and so that's been a really significant, but it seems to have found a floor. But buying the bottom is a risky thing to do. Chevron obviously has been a huge beneficiary of the oil price rise. This is the weekly chart, the long-term chart, and we see these upside targets that were met in 2021. We then went sideways and we're just touching a new high this week. No clear targets on the long term there, but that short-term target still has a bit further to run. And of course, the very short-term chart gives you a view as well. Looking at Microsoft, that's another interesting one in that, this is the medium-term chart, looks, it's been pretty bearish, Microsoft, and it really did fall away to that target. Lower high from the August high, so it hasn't had a new high since August. And now if you look at the 60-minute chart, again, you can see we've turned a corner. So that's been really key. A lot of other charts have been falling quite heavily in the US. We look at Goldman Sachs. It looks great on the longer term, maybe, but if we look at the weekly chart, big upside targets on the weekly that were given back in 2024. But interestingly, we see the shorter term target, that target now starting to look like it won't be met. And that's the key point, is just recognizing when a target is running out, when the price is running out of steam on the way to a target. And the 60-minute will show you the downside target. So that's quite key as well. Now, looking at the LSEG list with the London Stock Exchange list, top 100 stocks. First thing I do every day is just rank these stocks, and we can see where the performance is. So Compass Group, that is a potential recovery. We're still below the cloud, but we do have a new upside target. Have we found the bottom? Again, that's a risky move. You want it confirming with the 60-minute chart if you're going to make that kind of move. But looking here, we've got stocks like 3i that has up today, but not a great looking chart at all. Below the cloud always. EasyJet, we're seeing airlines really badly hit. It's going to take a lot for airlines to recover from this crisis. Jet fuel is their biggest input cost, and of course that has really rocketed with what's been going on this last week. IAG, which is British Airways, as such, that downside target has been generated. The 60-minute chart shows the extent of those targets, and that's where sometimes the 60-minute chart will give you a view. Beneficiaries, there aren't many, but BAE Systems is definitely one, and we're seeing upside targets there, again on the 60-minute. And if we go looking at the other end of the spectrum, we see here there is not many fallers today, so quite a strong end to the week. Retailers, are still strong on the medium term, but we're just seeing them falling away today. Intercontinental hotels, they obviously are being hurt by this crisis, less people traveling, and so we are seeing a downside target that's nearly been met there. And again, the 60-minute chart below the cloud, you'd want to watch for that to move above that. So it's a really interesting day. You've got to just watch those. Remember, you can click on any chart and just hit the T key and it will put the targets on for you. So until Monday, have a good weekend. Keep a close eye on the targets. Until then, bye for now.